structures, faults, and reservoirs. What are those? We talk to an expert and get the crude truth on this episode.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs, and if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
This episode is brought to you by LFS Chemistry. We are committed to being good stewards of the environment. We are providing the tools so you can be too. NAPE Expo, where deals happen. Air Compressor Solutions. When everything is on the line, Air Compressor Solutions is the dependable choice to keep commercial business powered up. Sandstone Group. Exec Crew. Elevate your network, elevate your knowledge. Texas Star Alliance. Pecos Country Operating. Fueling our future.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of The Crude Truth. Oh my gosh, it is just an amazing time right now. And as always, is my co-host, Kristy. How are you?
I'm doing really good today. Thank you. How are you?
We're doing excellent today.
Yes.
It has been a full couple of weeks. We have been drilling up a storm there at the office. Well, I say at the office, but out in the field. And I feel like now is a great time to bring on a great guest because, it's like, how do we find the oil? What do we do? Right?
Yes.
Because the hole is what? This big?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you get the chicken or the stick, and you're like, well, how do you find it? And, well, we find it by hiring great geologists. So it was like a no-brainer to bring on a geologist to just maybe sit down and give us, dare I say, the crude truth on, what a geologist actually does and how they do things. So I invited on a great guest, and today our guest is Molly Turko. Molly, how are you?
I am great. Thank you guys for having me today.
Well, thank you for coming in, and thank you for driving into town to do this. We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And coming all the way up here or down here, I should say, to the Real News Studios in Dallas, because you actually reside with Devon Energy in Oklahoma, right?
I do, yeah. So, goodness, I think it was a 3-hour drive to get here, but it was not bad at all. Texas, you're like our neighbor.
This is true.
That is true. That is so nice of you to say that. Even for a first time I would say that, like, oh, Oklahoma, Texas, you're our neighbor. No bad talk, just, oh, you're our neighbor. So that's so nice of you to say. Molly, thank you so much for coming on. For those out there that don't know you, can you give us a little background on you before we dive in?
Sure. I am Dr. Molly Turko, but don't call me doctor because it's a little bit awkward. Just call me Molly. But I have a PhD in structural geology. So that means that I really love broken rocks. I love understanding how they break, why they break. Pretty much raised in Oklahoma my whole life. So the oil field has always been in my backyard. My grandpa and dad were probably similar background to you. They were just kind of raised in the oil field. They weren't necessarily geologists or engineers. They just kind of grew up with it. So when I did finally decide to go to college and bounce around a lot, I eventually discovered geology. And my professor at the time was a petroleum geologist. So I was like, I really like rocks. What can I do with this? He's like, you can go into the petroleum industry. So I looked into that. I was at Tulsa Community College and got my associates in geology. Then I went to the University of Tulsa for 2 more years. I got my bachelor's in geology. It was kind of hard to get a job as a geologist with just my bachelor's. A lot of people really wanted you to have your master's. And I had an offer to be a teaching assistant, and they would pay for 2 more years. So I got my master's in geology.
Okay.
And then I went to work with Chesapeake Energy in Oklahoma City full time. Initially hated working, really missed the college life, always wanted to be like a teacher and a professor. So I decided to go back to school part-time at the University of Oklahoma, where I studied under Shankar Mitra, who was like a world-renowned structural geologist.
Yes.
It took a lot of time because I did school part-time while working full-time, which I eventually came to love working. I hated working corporate at first, but eventually I loved the data, I loved the people, I loved the project. So now I do love working in the industry, but eventually graduated with a PhD in structural geology. So I have a lot of degrees, but they're all kind of in the same thing. And then currently I'm with Devon Energy in Oklahoma City, and I also do some teaching for another company called Applied Stratigraphics. And then occasionally I'll just do them for myself, I guess. I have Turko Tectonics, which is kind of my brand, but sometimes I might do like a one-day field trip to the Arbuckle Mountains or a one-day field trip to the Wichita Mountains. I'll usually just do that under Turko Tectonics just to keep my name relevant. It's always important to be relevant out there, right?
That it is.
I did not know that those were scheduled field trips that you do, because we were briefly talking about that. So let's talk about that,
Yeah.
and let's talk about the Wichita Mountains for any listeners out there or people. The Wichita Mountains are just basically just north of the Texas border and south there at the Oklahoma border.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they're very close to Lawton, Oklahoma. Fort Sill is a big air base down there. So many times I've gone down there and they've been exploding things. So we'll be on a field trip and on top of Mount Scott, the tallest mountain down there, and we'll hear big explosives. But yeah, I do field trips down there. I do go out on my own quite a bit. If you were to call, if you guys want to just like go meet for a day.
I want to go on a field trip.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I'll take you
Sure.
to like my favorite spot in the world. When I die, I want my ashes to be spread in the
love it.
Wichita Mountains.
Really?
So now the world knows where they can find me. Yeah. It's just
Love that.
beautiful down there.
Okay. That is definitely a planned field trip. For
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
Yes.
That could be real fun. Actually, yeah, we could
Yeah.
do our best. Yeah, I think so. And I like how you mentioned that Lawton, Oklahoma, and the Wichita Mountains. We've got leases there just south of Lawton in the Burke Burnett, Holiday, Wichita
Yeah.
Falls area, which is technically one of the original boom towns that they consider in the industry.
Yeah.
It wasn't Pennsylvania, but it was, I think, where a lot of people here in Texas initially, got their teeth cut or whatever as you want to say. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. I've driven that road many times going to Wichita Falls or Abilene recently, and you go through Burke Burnett and you see those big oil rig kind of statues or things on the side of the road. So I know there's some pretty good history there.
Oh man, there's some wells over there that are still producing that were drilled, or I say some. There's a well that's only works on the weekends, and they go on Friday, turn it on, and they shut it off Monday mornings. But it produces 5 barrels every weekend. The pump jack is probably no bigger than our table,
Oh,
and it was drilled in 1901. Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
That's
And,
awesome.
So Burke Burnett, that whole area, Lawton, Oklahoma, and so what is it though about the Wichita Mountains that's your favorite place as a geologist and somebody that loves the rocks? Like, let's dive into that.
Well, initially just kind of being there and seeing how beautiful they are. My favorite time is the spring because the rocks are very like deep oranges and reds. And of course, Southwest Oklahoma, everything's like dry and brown. It's a desert basically. But in the spring after the rains, when everything initially blooms, you get such green grasses and green moss. And just that contrast in the colors are beautiful, and the flowers are out, and there are these little colorful lizards that come out on the rocks and do lizard stuff. And there's buffalo and longhorn. So even for a non-geologist, you can just see the beauty in it. It's really a beautiful place, beautiful hiking. You would never know you're in Oklahoma in some of the canyons you can hike through. But from a geology perspective, that's like the core of Oklahoma geology. Back 500 plus million years ago, the continent split. And as the continent split, a piece of it kind of tore into southern Oklahoma. So that tear tore basically all the way down into like the magma, like the earth. So as that magma began to kind of rise through these faults, as that area began to spread, the magma cooled and it became the different types of granites that we see there today. And so that that alone is pretty cool, right? But then back in what like a geologist would call the Pennsylvanian period, supposedly like 270 million years ago or so, you had North America that was colliding with like Africa and South America at the time.
Okay.
And that collision created uplift of that region. So normally all of the Wichita Mountains should just be buried very deep underground, but because of that later collision, it essentially got popped up and exposed them as we see them today. And in being a structural geologist and loving broken rocks, like there's just such a rich kind of structural history, and to really dive into it, it tells a beautiful story. And I studied it for my dissertation. I've got a lot of publications and visuals and block diagrams, but just structurally, it has a very beautiful story as well.
It's crazy and powerful at the same time. I never would have even, you always think like, how did that form or how this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And to sit there and one, they always talk about Pangea, which is basically what it sounds like you were talking about.
Yeah.
250 million years ago. And that it has that the Oklahoma-Texas border has that you see proof of Pangea, or I guess maybe it may not be the right word, I don't know, but you have examples of why Pangea was real.
Yeah.
And that right there on those faults, I've been rock climbing, not rock climbing, rappelling there at the Wichita Mountains. You can't really do a lot of rock climbing, but you can rappel there. They got the river at the bottom. And so I'm just trying to go back to when I was younger and doing that stuff, and you just see all these different layers. Is that, that whole area has been prolific from the Texas Panhandle to really Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sorry, but I guess what would that be? I guess from Oklahoma City down. Is that kind of fair? That whole area has been a prolific oil and gas play for almost 100 years, right?
Yeah, that boundary. So if you're familiar with kind of where the Appalachian Mountains trace around, that whole thing has been a suture zone that's really kind of come together and split up and come together and split up and come together and split up through like the past 600 million years of like geologic history. Yeah, so it's not just like one thing that happened. It's happened multiple times, because I'm sure there's some type of like weakness that builds up because it doesn't always break off at the same place. Mm-hmm. It kind of like shifts down the line. But where you have those shifts, there's places where maybe the crust was a little bit weaker, so you could sink that, and we would call that like subsidence. That's where the basins would form. Okay. So, of course, once you get rocks and things that have organic matter in it, once you sink that deep enough to get the heat and the pressure, all that organic stuff turns into oil, which is what we want, right? Yeah. And then that oil is more buoyant than like the naturally occurring, what we would probably call like a salt water or groundwater, not like groundwater that you would just go drill like a water well.
Right.
But I mean, there's water in our rocks. You know that, right?
Yes. Yeah, we
call them dry hells.
We were talking about that yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
Yeah.
Like, we're basically on the ocean.
That's true. Yeah. There's like so much water in our earth, but it's pretty salty, but the oil is more buoyant. So it moves around in these different paths, and eventually it finds a spot where it gets stuck. We would call that a trap and a seal. And then that's what geologists are great for. We find those for you guys. They go drill them. Yeah.
You talk about the traps and the seals. Right now, when we're drilling, we feel like we're at a spot. And again, I might be butchering the whole thing. So I'm not going to mention my geologist is. But kind of want everybody to take them. But I'm sorry if I butcher it. But we found a good sand, and then there's a limestone at the bottom. And, is that a good thing to have sometimes? Like that limestone at the bottom?
It really just depends on if that limestone contains oil or if it contains water. Yeah. If you have a really good conventional sandstone reservoir, I'd say stay out of the limestone. You don't need it. But if you have a really tight limestone, maybe you have more porosity in that limestone and those pores are filled with oil, maybe you want to tap into there. But limestones tend to behave like a very conventional system. Okay. So that basically means that you want a trap and a seal. Yeah. Without that, you're more likely to get water. Yeah. And so it's it's not an easy yes or no question. You just kind of have to look at the whole system. Think of it from what we would call like a petroleum systems analysis. As a structural geologist, trap and seal are very important for me.
Yes.
Trap is the geometry, simply just the geometry. And the seal is going to be, it could be like a shale rock that's very tight that covers that trap.
Right.
That would be a good example of a seal. And if that creates a dome, what we would call an anticline, oil could be trapped in a dome. But if there's no dome, or if it's the opposite, if it's a bowl, there's a chance that's full of water.
And isn't that funny that you would think normally a bowl would be the good thing, but it's actually the dome.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
That
And it's because
works.
oil is buoyant. It wants to go up. So once it finds that dome and if it has a good seal, it's like, it's just going to sit there.
Yeah.
Build pressure until somebody pokes a well in there.
And when you poke the well, you still, we were yesterday, you still got to do the perps. Like even if it's, because we do a lot of conventional, actually that's all we do,
Yeah.
we do some, non-op with let the big boys handle those big
Yes.
horizontals. They've proven that they know how to do it really well. But we like to, operate the more conventional, straight, good old fashioned vertical wells. And that even when you got to go down, you still have to perf there. And then hopefully your rock is, like you said, porous enough to where then you can just create that suction or maybe even free flow.
Yeah. Very true.
Yes. And so, I love it. I don't know that much about geology other than, what I have been able to learn over the years. And like we were saying too, before we jumped on this episode, that it's like, I know enough to know if a geologist is straight up lying, but then once you dive into the actual data of here's why it looks good. Like I used to always do the airplane wings on the logs, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Where because on the well logs, you sit there, and then I used to always be like, oh look, there's some airplane wings. All of a sudden, everything shoots out like the gamma rays.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, there it is. And
There's-
a lot of times it's true, but a lot of times it's not true. It might just be water.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yes. And but well logs are also an important part of what y'all look at. Is that correct?
Yeah, very true. I mean, those well logs are reading those rocks. And nowadays we have incredibly brilliant petrophysicists that can, I was on a project recently and we had old well logs from the 60s. And it was frustrating because we're used to modern logs. We're used to having all the answers, the neutron, the density, the PE logs, all of those things that really kind of speak to us, but we're dealing with these old logs from the 60s. And it was my intern. I had an intern this summer working on the project, and he did a beautiful job with it. And we got to work with our petrophysicist, who's like incredibly brilliant. But those logs are such a key part of the story because they're really telling us about the types of rocks, the fluids in the rocks, and how those transition as you go deeper or shallower.
Yes, and I think that's cool that y'all were able to back into that data because of the old wells or the old logs.
Yeah.
A lot of people, and I'm glad that you taught your intern that we've in our travels, when we're looking for geologists, we need to find somebody that can read those 1960s logs
Yes.
because we have wells that we have that were drilled in the 60s or early 70s,
Mhm.
and they're still producing today. And when we want to go in and rework them, we need to understand what's going on. And they're like, well, where's your gamma? Where's this? And it's like, well, here's some formulas. And, because that's what I've had to do is like
Yeah.
you back into the porosity or you back
Exactly.
into the resistivity.
Yes.
And, so, every now and then I do some math. I try not to share it too much. But it helps because you know these things. And I think that's a lost art, Molly, that everything's going on, that we are getting into a world of we're handed everything, or because we are able to get more data, which is nice.
Yeah.
But with the more data, and we take that old data and we can collide, that makes it even better.
Yeah, it really does. I feel like I was almost a last generation of people who, when we were in college, we were really taught the petroleum system in kind of the conventional way. I graduated with my bachelor's in 2009 and my master's in 2011, and I went straight to work at Chesapeake Energy. And they were drilling these horizontal wells, which was like incredible technology. They were learning how to frack these wells and think about different stages and how much sand to pump, all these different things. So very technically heavy on the engineering side. But I almost feel like there was a period, almost a decade, where that was what people saw. They thought, this is the future. I don't have to worry about whether I have a trap and a seal because this is shale rock. It's my source rock. I'm fracking it. It's there. Let's get it out. So there was a big, I feel like, a loss.
Yes.
But now a lot of those shales have been drilled up. People are going back to think about conventionals and think about hybrid plays where you need a mix of both. And I almost feel like there's like this new spark for understanding conventional reservoirs, and it's kind of exciting.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's real good, actually, because of conventionals. And I like how you also mentioned that's like, hey, a lot of the shale has been drilled. And I think that would have been considered a tier 1. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
And and then you had the tier 2 and the tier 3s.
Yes.
And now because of technology on the good side and these traps and these faults, that it's like maybe these tier 2 and tier 3s might even be better than they initially thought, to where they're now going to be even better than the tier 1s.
Oh, very true. Yeah. One, because of technology. And then once you drill so many wells and you drill each one a little bit differently, and then you realize, well, this well did really good. We did X, Y, and Z. Let's try X, Y, and Z on tier 3. Now my tier 3 well is better than my tier 1 because of that time and data and technology and things that you're learning and applying along the way. Technology is always going to kind of help us out in the end, you know?
It is. Yeah.
Oh, I'm just taking this all. I'm sorry. I'm not talking much today. I'm like obsessed.
It's a lot. Well, and, Kristy, you've been now doing this for almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were out there drilling this week, and it's just been so much fun. And it's like, these are all the things that we look at when we decide, hey, we're going to put a hole right here.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And because you figure, like where we're at right now, the spacings are 330 feet. Mm-hmm. And so that just means we got to at least be 330 feet separating the wells. Well, there's so much. It's like 330 feet and you got 7 inches. Like,
yeah,
that's a big gamble. It's a gamble, but I say that, but it's really not, because we're doing so much research into that 7 inches and where to place it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see from start to finish. Like, how do you even know? And this, and I was mesmerized yesterday. I was like, oh, they're like, you're getting sprayed with oil. I don't care. That's what I wore this for. Yay!
Yeah.
It's about,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to find the oil. And a lot of geologists are always like, hey, I found this. And I joke with you, but I got to ask, how many barrels of oil have you found over your time? I told you I'd ask you that.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It's a great question. I don't have a number. I'm gonna pretend like it's a whole lot.
It is.
Yeah. Traditionally, I've always had kind of a technical role. So
Yes.
I have been an exploration kind of geologist in that role before, but primarily as a structural geologist, my role is more about understanding, are there faults and fractures in the reservoir? If there are, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Not all fractures are bad. Not all fractures are good. It depends on what are they filled with? Are your fractures filled with oil or water? Are they open at all? Because if you think about a really tight rock, like we talked about conventional versus unconventional. Conventional, you would have a good porous sandstone reservoir. Unconventional would be like a very tight shale. But what if you have a very tight sandstone that's completely cemented up? You're not going to have a bunch of like porosity. You're going to have a little bit. But let's say that's near a big fault system and there's a lot of fractures in there. Now those fractures can be pathways. And pathways can be really important as long as they're transporting oil and not water. But if those pathways are transporting oil, then those are fractures that you'd want, right?
Right.
So that's kind of my role, is understanding, do we have fractures and faults? Are they significant or not? Can they help us? Can they hurt us? And where are they? Do we want to stay away from them? Because they're not just blanketed. There's might be a fault over here where we see more fractures and not a fault over here. So it really spatially is kind of dependent, as well as understanding like down to that minute fracture, like how is that hurting us or helping us?
Jeez. And I think that also is a testament to what companies that are at that level are able to do, but also it shows how much care they're putting into not only the new wells, but then to go back and understand more, because obviously, like we're saying, the more data we have, the more we know, which is obvious. And so to have you and your team being there analyzing all these things, it creates new life in these old fields for people.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, golly, you are just, I mean, again, what you and your team do, because y'all have a pretty big team there. I mean, right?
Yes.
I mean, y'all are Devon, a multi.
Yeah.
Billion
Yeah.
dollar.
We have quite a few business units, and then we have a really pretty good sized technical team. It includes engineers and geologists, and we all kind of have a specialty in something.
Jeez. So you just recently did a talk in Abilene. Let's talk about that just for a brief minute, because you know, I always joke that Abilene is where the Fort Worth Basin and the Midland Basin merge.
Yes.
You know, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm learning something new here today.
I mean, there are some pretty basic outline maps that you can find on the internet, and in some people a little bit more picky. It's like, are you in the basin or are you on the shelf?
Yeah, right. I mean, some people want to like, well, what do you mean you're part of the Permian, or what do you mean you're in the Fort Worth Basin? Then it's like, well, I'm in the Barnett Shell. Like, oh, okay, then that kind of might be, you know, limits it a little bit more. Then it's like, well, I'm in the Weir Sands. It's like, oh, okay, that's over here, or I'm in the Strauner, because so you know, with everything that goes on, what makes Texas? And I know you're an Oklahoma girl, but what makes Texas so geological rich with oil? Like, what is it about Texas that makes that happen?
Oh,
That's
man.
a good question.
If you think Oklahoma is special, Texas has that, but like multiplied.
Can you say that again for all my Texan fans out there?
I don't know why Oklahoma people really want to hear me say that. No, I mean, you look at oil numbers, I don't think that's any surprise. Right. Yeah. But Texas had the same geologic history as Oklahoma, because I had mentioned that suture zone from the Appalachian Mountains, and that circles all the way around through like central southern Texas, even into Mexico. So like the Oklahoma basins, a lot of those are Pennsylvanian in age. So around 270, 300 million years ago, maybe a little younger or older here and there. That's the same geologic history that happened in the Permian Basin. You have the Delaware and the Midland Basin, basically your two bowls. Right. And both of those bowls were sinking during the Pennsylvanian, and in the Permian, the time period followed the Pennsylvanian. And then a lot of that history is also seen, you know, you have like the Llano Uplift, you have the Fort Worth Basin. Mm-hmm. Fort Worth Basin is the same. Yeah. Pennsylvanian age basin. That's why we have all of the same rocks, the Woodfords, the Barnetts, the Arbuckle Ellenbergers. It's all kind of the same system, right?
Okay.
And then it was all impacted during what we would call the Pennsylvanian orogeny. Orogeny is like a mountain building event. Okay. So Pennsylvanian orogeny is a big word in geology.
It's a big word in anything, orogeny.
Yeah. And then once you get into like South Texas and the Gulf Coast, you had mentioned Pangea earlier. Pangea was like the last big supercontinent that split, and when that split, that's kind of when the Gulf of Mexico opened. Okay. But as the Gulf of Mexico opened and everything started to kind of sink into the Gulf, for a lack of words, there was some salt, and the salt made it easy to kind of like sink down there. That created a lot of faults. That created a lot of reservoirs along kind of the Gulf Coast as well. What else? Man. Yeah, so Texas has a pretty complex tectonic story as well. Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Holy cow. So a meteor did not create the Gulf of Mexico then?
No, it didn't create the Gulf of Mexico. It might have crashed into there, but it didn't create it.
Okay, because I would be not trying to switch gears or anything, but or even get into it. But I always thought I always heard maybe a comet or something. But anyway, so you're saying that the
that's cute. Sorry, you killed the dinosaur. Sorry.
Yeah. You know what? No, that's not thought. That's no.
Killed the dinosaur.
That might be the one that killed the dinosaur.
Have
you heard that before?
Of course, yes,
okay,
yes. You're right.
You just believe that.
No, but I love how the Pangea. And something else I want to pick up on that you said was that Pangea was the last super.
Yes.
So had this happened possibly?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah. There's Gondwana and Rodinia. Those are two other major supercontinents. And one of the earliest ones to break up was when I mentioned the Wichita Mountains. And I had mentioned that, you know, it wasn't necessarily called North America at that time. But let's say North America. Right. North America split. You had a tear that tore into southern Oklahoma. That's the Wichita Mountains. So that happened, goodness, like 575 million years ago, 65 million years ago.
I promise you, we're not gonna fact check you.
Okay.
It's 500 million plus years ago. How about that?
And then they came together, and you had one part of the Appalachian Mountains pop up, and then they split up again, maybe like 370 million years ago.
Okay.
And then they came together again, and that's what we call the Pennsylvania orogeny. That was like 270 something million years ago. And then it went apart for the last time, and that's what created, you know, if you go up to like Greenland and Iceland, there's like the continents are split apart, and then that kind of comes down into the Gulf of Mexico. So that was like the last time everything split apart.
Wow.
Yeah. If you Google paleogeography, there's a guy named Ron Blakey. Okay. He's got some beautiful maps and animations, and just Google paleogeography of the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
I don't even know what to say. Cannot wait to go research this.
Yeah, because like you're talking about all these faults, and so this isn't the first time then that obviously we have earthquakes on Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Right during this time.
Yes.
And this also means that well, let me ask you this, not that it means. So does that mean that all these plates are still moving every day?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they move faster in some places, and sometimes they move together, apart, or slide next to each other.
So I get this question a lot, especially, and I think you may already know where I'm going.
I know where you're going.
And I get this question all the time, especially whenever I the news media things that every now and then I get to do. You know, the other day it came up again. It's like, these earthquakes that are happening right now, are they caused by the oil and gas industry? And I say no. I said, if you look at the I-35, it's on a fault. Yeah. And that's why you got inner space cavern, natural bridge cavern. I like natural bridge cavern. Yeah. It's a cool place. And like 2 or 3 other ones. And it's like, it's on a fault line. Texas is a fault line. And now learning all of this more today, I mean, it's always going to be moving. Is that right? I mean, are we?
Yeah. I mean, the Earth and the plates have been moving for like millions and billions of years, and we have our plate boundaries. So have you heard of like the San Andreas Fault in California?
Yes.
That's a major plate boundary. And they recently had some decent sized earthquakes. They've obviously had some like really big ones in the past. And then we have kind of old plate boundaries, old things that are from like mountain building events like 270 something million years ago. That was a time when the plate boundaries were really near to like Oklahoma and Texas. Okay. So our crust, can I call the Earth the crust? Sure. Yeah. So once you get down past the soil where the rocks are like really deep, they're just busted up. There's faults. There's faults everywhere. I mean, not everywhere, but like it just because you don't see a fault out your window doesn't mean there's not one 10,000 feet below your feet in the granite that you're sitting on. Wow. So there are faults everywhere, but we've had a very kind of dynamic Earth for a long time, especially Oklahoma and parts of Texas. They're very broken up. And faults like to move whenever they're under a condition that we would call stressed. So they get stressed out. They get like really stressed out. Yeah. And it kind of just, their stress is naturally occurring in our Earth. Everything is under stress. That's natural. It's just there. And those stresses have magnitudes and orientations. So if there's an existing fault in the subsurface and it's optimally aligned to these stresses, like the slightest perturbation, it might want to move. And it's not going to, I mean, you're not going to get like a magnitude 10 because you made a fault slip, but you might get like a magnitude 1 or something that you don't even feel. Okay. And so
like the ones recent that we had here in Texas, did you know? I'm like, people are like, in my building, there's a earthquake. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean,
so that's minute is what you mean. Okay.
Yes. Because just thinking about like plate tectonics, what you get in California or what's happened in like Japan or Indonesia, those are big
ones.
tectonic earthquakes.
Okay.
What can happen in the basins is just, it's relatively small. Yeah. And sometimes like activity can cause it. I mean, we're fracking wells, we're breaking rock. That causes earthquakes, but they're too tiny. You don't feel them. I've been on site for like frack jobs, and I was like, I was new in the industry. I was like, all right, let's frack this well.
Yeah.
Like waiting. Like, wait, I didn't feel it. No. So we do create tiny earthquakes, but it's not something
that you would actually feel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's sound like the cartoons where they would throw the dynamite stick underneath the ground, also you just see the ground like do this. And come
That's
back.
not really what happened.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
That's what I was expecting, but it didn't happen.
Well, like for us
Disappointment.
yesterday, I always try to look for like maybe a little pop when we perf the wells. Maybe a spark might come up 2,000 feet or.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really uneventful.
It really is, but every time you do it, you're like, come on.
This is him.
I got to do that yesterday. Like, come on now. Come on.
Yeah.
It is fun. Well, Molly, I cannot thank you so much for coming on today. Before I ask you our new little thing that we do like to ask all our guests, how can people find you?
The best way, honestly, is through LinkedIn. That's where I feel like I'm cool. I I have an Instagram and a TikTok, but I don't do too much. I kind of just post my videos there. But LinkedIn is the best place to kind of connect with me. Molly Turko. I don't think there's that many Molly Turkos in the world, so pretty easy to find. If you want to email me, my email is turkotectonics@gmail.com. So I have to play on the last name, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of playing on last names, field trip. So would a fall or spring field trip would you prefer to do?
Oh, wow. Spring is always nice because you get like the greens.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. We're doing it then.
Okay.
I think we need to do something.
Can we do a fall one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
I don't want to wait.
I
till
would
spring.
go today.
Okay. Well,
I
let's
don't
go.
care if it's 100 degrees.
Yes. Okay. Let's do something, and we'll make something. Maybe we'll do a dry run in the fall, and maybe do something like, maybe try to get some other companies and do something big for the spring.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah.
That would be real cool. Just do which I love the Wichita Mountains, and
I've not been.
oh, they're fun.
I've
They're real
heard.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't take much to get me down there.
Okay.
But I think that'd be super fun to go do it. And again, you did some hiking here real recently too.
I was in Colorado. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, I love Colorado. It was in Durango, but yeah, went to the waterfall and it was raining, and then everybody's freaking out because it's raining. I'm like, no rain.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting to see the layers, and I sat there for hours and just took it all in.
It's so beautiful there.
See,
It is.
so we're doing it. So
Yeah.
we're going to do two. We'll do a small one, and then we'll try to do maybe even throw in a fundraiser for that second one.
That'd be fun.
I'm just shooting from the hip here. So but
Yeah.
it does sound like a good time.
Yeah.
So
do
we're
it.
going to do it. No, we'll do that. So we've been doing now some fun 5 burning questions, just real quick, rapid fire. What book are you reading right now?
Okay. So normally I would say I don't read books because I have kids.
Okay.
But I did actually order one. So there's a guy named John Rotzian. He's a geologist, and he wrote a book. It's called oh my goodness, I'm gonna butcher it. The Wildcatting Mindset.
Okay.
Wildcatter's Mindset?
Maybe that's it.
Ooh.
Oh, I just ordered it. I haven't started reading it yet, but I'm really excited because I got it from Amazon, and he interviews all of these people from like industry to academia, kind of at different levels of their careers. The explorationist mindset. That's what it is.
see,
Yes,
I want
yes.
to-
That would be cool to read.
I want to read that. I've not heard of that one.
I'm like so excited to open it up. It'll be the first book I've read literally since before kids, and my oldest son just turned 7.
The BK before kids.
Yeah, BK.
BK before kids, yeah. Are you streaming anything right
No. No
now?
streaming.
That's all right.
I like me.
Do you have a favorite sports team?
No, not really. Oh my goodness.
That's
That's
okay.
okay.
That's
Did I say
okay.
Dallas Cowboys?
That's
No,
okay. That's
he
American.
said that.
That's okay. And then last one, do you have a favorite restaurant there in Oklahoma that you like to go eat at?
Oh, goodness. I really like, it's kind of basic. I love Fuzzy's tacos.
Okay.
I love good Mexican food, and their tacos are like really good. So
Okay.
let's just go with that one.
There you go.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, again, Molly, I cannot thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for this, because geology is probably, well, it's all important, as we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah.
Every piece of drilling a new well or finding a new play is, well, that's where geologists come in a lot more. But everybody in a well has a big part in it. You know, there's no small parts, and the geology is key.
I was going to say that's probably the biggest part.
Yeah. And so I just cannot thank you enough for coming on to share your knowledge and showcase your knowledge. I mean, because you got those fun little shows that we didn't even talk about. The Fracture Fridays and What's It To, what are they real quick?
Okay, so Faulty Mondays, What Is That Wednesdays,
Yes.
and Fractured Fridays.
I love that. Are they on your Instagram? Is that where you...
I do usually copy and paste them over there,
Okay.
but LinkedIn is usually the first place I
Okay.
post them, because that's where I'm friends with all the geologists. And so I have a Facebook, but it's like my family, I'll get like 2 or 3 likes, put the same video on LinkedIn, it's like 300 likes.
Yeah. I closed down Facebook just for that reason. You're fired.
You're out. You're out. Well, again, Molly, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing all the knowledge with us. And I bet all our listeners probably got a lot of questions answered. Also, so if anybody has any questions, reach out to her, reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to get you connected with her. Okay. And we'll see everybody again on another episode of The Crude Truth.
Again, the Crude Truth would like to thank today's sponsors: LFS Chemistry, NAPE Expo, Air Compressor Solutions, Sandstone Group, Exec Crew, Texas Star Alliance, Pecos Country Operating, and Real News Communication Network.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.